What if the silos were never built to save humanity, but to control what humanity was allowed to remember about its own destruction? Because once you connect the radiation-ravaged surface, the founding era timeline, and Juliet's discovery of multiple silos, a very different picture starts forming underneath everything Silo is showing us. The surface doesn't look like a simple apocalypse. It looks engineered, controlled, contained. Whatever happened outside didn't just destroy civilization, it created the perfect conditions for rebuilding it under strict supervision. And that's where the silos come in. Not as shelters, but as controlled environments designed to restart humanity under rules written by whoever survived the collapse. The show hints that the world was devastated by a combination of environmental failure and large-scale industrial catastrophe. Radiation, toxic air, and long-term contamination turned the surface into something uninhabitable. But the key detail isn't just that the world became dangerous, it's that it became predictable. Nothing outside evolves. Nothing heals. It remains frozen in a permanent state of death. That kind of stability doesn't feel random. It feels managed, like someone decided the surface should stay exactly as it is. And that's where the founding timeline becomes critical. The flashbacks featuring early figures like Charlotte, Daniel, and Helen aren't just backstory. They are the construction phase of a system that would eventually become the silos. These aren't survivors reacting to collapse. These are architects deciding what comes after it. The decisions made in that era don't just influence the silos, they define them. The rules of the pact, the strict control of information, the idea that truth must be filtered for survival, none of that appears by accident. It is designed into the system from the beginning. Here's where things become interesting. If the silos were built after a global catastrophe, then someone had to decide what humanity should never be allowed to fully understand about that catastrophe. Not just how it happened, but why it happened, and what came before it. Because if survivors understood the full truth, the system could collapse again. That's the logic behind every controlled society in Silo. Stability is not built on truth. It is built on carefully limited truth. This is why memory control becomes the most important weapon in the entire story. Because controlling the present is not enough. You also have to control the past. And that is where the algorithm fits into the deeper structure of the silos. The algorithm isn't just a governing system inside Silo 18, it behaves like an extension of the original founding logic. It doesn't simply react to rebellion. It anticipates instability and removes it before it spreads. Bernard's role, Camille's rise, Juliet's memory suppression. None of these events feel like isolated decisions. They feel like different expressions of the same original directive. Preserve the system, even if it means rewriting reality inside it. Now connect that to Juliet's cleaning. When Juliet survives the outside world, she doesn't just break a rule, she breaks a historical certainty. Every person before her reinforced the same belief: the surface kills everyone. But Juliet becomes the first contradiction. And contradictions are dangerous because they don't just challenge authority, they challenge the entire foundation of truth. That is why her survival matters more than any rebellion. Because she didn't just escape the silo, she escaped its definition of reality. And once that happens, the system has only two options: destroy the evidence or contain it. Juliet is contained. But containment requires something more precise than imprisonment. It requires memory control. That is why her experience after returning becomes so important. She isn't simply recovering from trauma. She is being systematically stripped of the one thing that makes her dangerous: continuity. The memory of what she saw outside. The knowledge of multiple silos. The proof that everything she was told was incomplete. Because if she remembers everything, she becomes a living record of failure. And systems like this cannot survive records of failure. That's where Lucas, Whisper inside the Legacy Vault, becomes the final connecting piece. Whatever Lucas discovered wasn't just information about Juliet or Bernard. It was information about structure, about how decisions are made, about how leadership is assigned and removed, about how the system corrects itself when reality no longer matches expectation. Bernard's reaction tells us everything. He doesn't argue. He doesn't resist. He doesn't try to reinterpret the message. He simply stops. Because Lucas didn't give him a warning, he revealed the mechanism behind the warning system itself. The moment Bernard understands that, he also understands something more dangerous. He is not operating the system, he is inside it. And systems like that don't negotiate, they replace. Which is why Camille becomes so important in the same breath. Not because she is more powerful than Bernard, but because she is more predictable. She doesn't interpret, she executes. She doesn't question structure, she maintains it. In a system designed to eliminate instability, predictability is the highest form of value. So when you step back, everything starts forming a single line. The founders built a system to survive collapse. The silos preserve that system through controlled truth. The algorithm enforces it through replacement logic. Bernard breaks it through interpretation. Camille stabilizes it through obedience. Juliet threatens it through memory. And Lucas is the one person who sees the structure behind all of it, which leads to the real question the show is quietly building toward. If humanity is being preserved inside the silos through controlled memory, selective truth, and engineered leadership, then what exactly happened outside that was so dangerous it required not just survival, but permanent control? Because the radiation didn't just destroy the world, it created the reason the truth can never be fully remembered. The deeper implication is that the silos were never designed as temporary shelters at all, but as long-term narrative machines. Everything inside them, history, rules, punishment, even rebellion, exists inside boundaries set by the founding logic. That means every generation is not just surviving the aftermath of a collapse, they are inheriting a carefully edited version of what that collapse was allowed to mean. The surface remains toxic and unreadable, not only because of radiation or environmental decay, but also because it functions as a permanent wall between truth and understanding. If the outside world ever became fully legible again, the entire justification for the silos would collapse instantly. That's why Juliet's survival is such a critical rupture in the system. She didn't just walk farther than anyone else. She broke the idea that distance equals death. Every step she took beyond the hill redefined what outside actually means. And once that definition breaks, every rule built on it starts to weaken. The algorithm doesn't respond to her as a criminal because criminals can be punished. It responds to her as a contradiction, something that must be contained without being fully destroyed. That's why her return isn't met with execution, but with controlled amnesia. A dead Juliet tells no one anything. A living Juliet who remembers everything tells everyone everything. This is where the memory suppression becomes more than just a plot device. It becomes a structural tool of governance. The system doesn't erase Juliet's identity, because identity is harmless on its own. It targets the continuity between discovery and understanding. It breaks the chain that connects experience to meaning. That is why she can still speak, walk, and think, but cannot fully reconstruct what she saw outside. The algorithm isn't removing knowledge, it's preventing knowledge from forming into truth. In that sense, forgetting is not a failure of memory, it is a function of control. And that function connects directly back to Lucas' whisper in the Legacy Vault. Whatever he learned, it didn't just expose information about Juliet or Bernard, it exposed the architecture behind control itself. Bernard's immediate collapse in authority makes sense only if Lucas revealed something structural, not situational. Not what is happening, but how things are decided. The moment Bernard understands that decisions are not coming from him, or even from visible leadership, he realizes he has been acting inside a system that already accounts for his choices before he makes them. That realization reframes Camille's rise completely. She is not simply a replacement for Bernard, she is the system's correction for Bernard. Where he interpreted, she executes. Where he hesitated, she continues. Where he tried to preserve stability through judgment, she preserves it through compliance. The algorithm doesn't need her to be intelligent in the traditional sense, it needs her to be consistent. Because consistency reduces unpredictability, and unpredictability is the only real threat to a controlled system like the silos. And that brings everything back to Juliet again, because she represents the opposite principle entirely. She introduces unpredictability not through rebellion, but through discovery. Every truth she uncovers doesn't just challenge authority, it destabilizes the framework that authority is built on. That is why her memories matter more than her actions. The danger is not what she does inside the silo, but what she remembers doing outside of it. If those memories fully return, they don't just expose corruption, they expose design. And once people understand the system is designed, they stop believing it is natural